Thank you. This is episode 10 of the Blue Security Podcast, and today we are talking on the topic Research Meets Practice, Building Maritime Security in the Western Indian Ocean. So today's discussions follows the launch of the Strategic Policy Brief on the Regional Maritime Security Architecture, RMSA, the result of a long-term collaboration between the Indian Ocean Commission and the University of Oxford and the regional maritime practitioners. Rather than producing a research about the region, this partnership sought to produce research with the people who design, implement, and live regional maritime security every day. It is an example of how research and practice can inform one another to strengthen the maritime governance. Our conversation today will therefore focus not only on the maritime security itself, but also on what happens when evidence, operational experience, and policy come together. Before turning to our guests, it's worth reminding ourselves why the West Indian Ocean matters. The Indian Ocean is the home to a fifth of the water on Earth's surface. For this, it's a major theater for global geopolitical competition. In addition, Indian Ocean is also one of the most valuable trade regions in the world, with over 80% of the world's oil passing through Indian Ocean waters. The ocean is also home to regions, cultures, markets as diverse as Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, and some areas, some overseas territories in Europe. In fact, this diversity is an intersecting topic as to how the Indian Ocean region has struggled to create a common identity in a similar manner to other oceanic littorals, such as the Pacific Island nations, Southeast Asian countries bordering the South China Sea. Majorly, the Indian Ocean is divided into varying religions, cultures, societies, and more or less continental silos, which has a great impact on the maritime connectivity. Dialogues among nations that border the ocean. However, these dynamics are evolving as mutual interest between nations across Indian and Pacific Oceans intertwine, a concept sterilized by Indo-Pacific. Again, geopolitical tensions are shaping the sea lines of communication, SLC within the Indian Ocean realm. Recent conflicts affecting the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf are largely affecting economies in this region. Other threats include the piracy, IUU fishing, and marine pollution. To respond to these challenges, effective and ocean governance, including maritime security, play a key role. But in its historical sense, maritime security has been seen as a Navy-led operation or initiative. In fact, this greatly informed how major powers, including the USA and China, approach the Indian Ocean. Regional players such as India, Australia, Japan, and France are also influencing power play dynamics in the region. But most importantly, the place of Indian Ocean island nations must not be forgotten. They occupy a critical maritime geography and greatly shape the geopolitical competition in the region. Against this backdrop, the regional cooperation has become more important than ever. I welcome Brian, who is going to take us through a series of questions from research to policy to understanding today's maritime security environment and regional cooperation and ocean governance. Welcome, Brian.
Roger, I wanted to direct this question to you about, we've been seeing you in the operations of the maritime security, and how I wanted first to understand how the policy brief came to be and the benefit of the interconnection between the people who are working in the operational space and the researchers, and how do you think it's going to benefit in building the maritime security or how we approach maritime security in the Indian Ocean, Western Indian Ocean?
Well, first of all, I think we have to acknowledge in the region that piracy was the wake-up call, and in 2009, the Secretary General of the IOC was Seychelles. And, Seychelles is at the forefront, just besides Somalia, is very well established there. And in fact, to be very frank, I was squarely against the IOC being involved in maritime security at that time. I thought that the IOC, the small IOC, doesn't have the capacity nor the resources to deal with challenges such as piracy, drug trafficking, IUU fishing, etc. But then things evolved slowly. We started, very modestly in the beginning. We were just facilitating the dialogue amongst Somalians and the region, facilitating through a program that was funded by the EU to facilitate the participation of Somalia representatives in regional fora and international fora. And that's how it started. But eventually, slowly, we realized that there are lots of gaps which needs to be filled. And this is how we came into the pot of maritime security, and we started getting things done. So that's the beginning. That's more than 15 years ago. Now, your other part of the question is then exactly how did we initiated the actions, right? Yeah. So when we were doing all this, we started going in, all sorts of regional consultations, regional works related to piracy. And then slowly we started understanding that the piracy is, of course, affecting some countries more than others. But more importantly, it impacted the global economy and impacted everyone. So that is where we started looking at, well, do we leave it for example, the contact group to look at that, or what are the other key stakeholders that we'll be looking at, like UNAVFOR, like at that time CMF started working, like SHADE and all this, those regional international groupings where we have all the various international stakeholders that are working together. And then slowly we realized that, of course, that is good, but then there are many challenges that are faced by the countries of the region that are not being adequately addressed. And this is where we started very slowly to be looking at all these. And eventually we came to understand that, that the countries of the region need to take their responsibility for the challenges that is impacting them. The difference between piracy and the rest is that the piracy has an international legal framework to deal with, and that's why everyone was coming in. It was affecting the community. It affected, very strongly some of the most important international community and maritime industry, but they have adequate resources to deal with. And then we said, okay, let us concentrate on the other aspects of maritime security and how we can deal with it. That's where the next phase came in the picture eventually. And then we reached where we are today with the signature of 2 regional agreements with the Regional Maritime Security Architecture. And hence we got the region to have a structured, organized mechanism to deal collectively with maritime security. Because at that time, all the countries realized that individually they won't be able to deal with those, each of the maritime security challenges. Let me stop here for the time being.
Yeah. But I wanted to understand, I know we've been talking about information sharing a lot, but now we are seeing an aspect of research. And now we even coming to the production of or publishing of the policy brief. I wanted to understand how the relationship with a partner like University of Oxford enriches this process. Just briefly, just to mention the role of research in this.
I was surprised to say, very frankly, it's University of Oxford that found IOC. I will let Kate explain that. How did she picked up the IOC? So to be very frank with you, we didn't go to look for University of Oxford. University of Oxford found us. Maybe Kate can explain what happened.
So Kate, you can explain why IOC and what is something fascinating that you found as you edited the policy brief about the regional maritime security architecture in Western Indian Ocean, now that Raj has already invited you. Please.
So thank you very much, Brian Johnson, Pascaline, for having me on the podcast. And it's always good to be in conversation with Raj. We'll probably discover that Raj and I have been in conversation for a great many years, and I'm very grateful for the partnership with the Indian Ocean Commission. But, the best things often happen by, coincidence, right? And I have to say, I never set out to work with the Indian Ocean Commission. I didn't even really know the Indian Ocean Commission existed, which is part of, I think, a story that needs telling, right? I was a scholar, still am a scholar of India and India's international politics, international relations. And I was watching India's influence growing in the Indian Ocean. And I think it's my kind of commitment in research, because I work in a discipline where most of international political history is narrated from the vantage point of either the United States or Western Europe. I'm always interested in how, actors and policymakers and thinkers in the rest of the world think about international politics. So my instinct was to say, okay, India's influence is growing. What do countries in the Western Indian Ocean think of that growing influence? I tried to make contact with diplomats in the Mauritian Foreign Affairs Ministry, and none of them wanted to talk to me. I think it's politically difficult, right, with the role of the UK, and I'm British, I'm at a UK institution, policymakers are busy, why would they want to talk to me? And actually one diplomat wrote and said, there's someone who's very passionate about, questions of politics in the Indian Ocean region, someone who's very active. I'll give you his email address. And that person was Raj. So I wrote to Raj and I said, look, I'm interested in, India's role in the Indian Ocean and, what great powers are doing, China, the United States, France, and I'm interested in how, island states in particular see those relations. Raj was very, very generous. He humored me. He said, sure, come, let's discuss. And I arrived and I discovered very quickly that in the work of the Indian Ocean Commission on Maritime Security, the big powers that I thought were important were actually really not so important. That the Indian Ocean Commission was much more interested in questions like, what are the key maritime security challenges? How are they connected? What is the best way of solving them in their local context? How can we fill the gaps in the other maritime security initiatives that exist? And really was a sort of, there was this amazing project going on of creating maritime security institutions that was far more interesting than my very simple early questions about the role of big powers in the region. And I think, this is just an example of how researchers often go somewhere and they think they have research questions that matter. And there's something quite incredible about actually listening to, policy practitioners on the ground and hearing what motivates them, what their priorities are, and how that listening and learning can help you really completely change the research questions that you arrived with. So long answer, but as I said, good things happen through coincidence, and also people opening doors and being very generous with their time, like Raj was with me.
To follow up to, I know the reasons track into the maritime security space in Western Indian Ocean. Think about what creates maritime security within the region and the role of island nations. I know you'll touch on that. most of the people who come to study about maritime security, they normally come from a perspective of big powers. But then there are also the regional partners and the island nations.
I'm so sorry, Brian. I can't understand your question because your voice is breaking up. I'm very sorry.
I don't know whether it's. I'm asking is. Okay, that's better. Sorry, I don't know how to explain this one. As someone who has come recently to the maritime security space in the Western Indian Ocean, what you found to contribute to maritime security in the region and the role of was most of the people who come or who attempt to study the maritime security region, they come with a perspective of big powers on how the big powers normally treat the region. It's likely the foundation or the driver contribute to maritime security and the role of the island nations and the regional players within the region.
Thank you, Brian. That's a really good question. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, when did Somali piracy become something that the international community actively sought to address? Well, it became something they sought to address when it bothered them, right? When it bothered their reliability of shipping or the duration of shipping or the insurance costs, right, for shipping. So whenever a maritime security threat sort of was felt in capitals like Washington, D.C. or London or Paris, I think that's when those powers were defining that as a maritime security threat and they were taking action. But of course, we know that maritime security threats existed in the region long before piracy appeared on the policy radar of these powers, right? And indeed, you know, there are powerful stories of illegal fishing or even illegal waste dumping in Somali waters that in part precipitated piracy itself in the first place. So maritime security is many different things, and what it is depends on you know, the stakeholder concerned. So when you ask me what is something interesting that I've learned through, you know, watching the IOC's work, you know, first of all, what does it mean to watch the IOC's work? Well, I've been very lucky to attend many high-level ministerial conferences and meetings, much smaller workshops. I've had a lot of generosity from practitioners in the region who've had long one-to-one interviews with me, who've shared, you know, the problems they see and the ways they've tried to deal with them. But I think it's what this architecture does and what these regional conversations do is I think they allow the smaller players, quote unquote, because, you know, less resources actually to deal with maritime security threats. The architecture and the meetings and the conversations around the architecture have allowed the region to come up with its own understandings of what maritime security actually is. There's a shared conversation which is really locally rooted and I think confident and is able to express itself and to put forward, you know, regional priorities. Now that can only happen through kind of mutual teaching from, you know, one country to other in the region, for creating the convening spaces for that teaching to happen. And I think that's what the work of the IOC in convening many meetings and in establishing the architecture has done. At least that's how I've seen it unfold.
And still lastly on this topic about the research, are there aspects of the maritime security in the Western Indian Ocean which you feel are appreciated by researchers and hence creates an opportunity for more researchers to come and study the area? What are the opportunities of research in this space that you see as a researcher?
So I think that, you know, Raj should answer this question because he knows, you know, there are specific maritime threats that he can elaborate on where more knowledge is needed because it's very hard to gain the data. The threats look different in every country. The situation is always rapidly changing and it's very hard to kind of, you know, take a photograph of something that's moving, right? So I think I'll hand it over to Raj on that. The only thing I would say is that I'm someone who believes that, you know, it's good to come to a region and really ask how it is understanding itself rather than to kind of arrive somewhere with a set of questions and concepts, and treat sort of policymakers or institutions as sort of objects to be studied. So I think that there's a duty on researchers to engage as much as possible, and policymakers have limited time. But I would like to see more research that is really engaged with actors in the region, and that actually listens to the kinds of questions that they want asked when it comes to designing research agendas.
You can go, and then Pascaline will come.
Yeah, no, sorry, just before Raj take over, I will have one question for you, Kate. If there's one lesson from this research practice partnership that others could replicate, what would it be?
Again, I'm speaking just for myself here, right? And I don't think that anyone, I have necessarily a recipe that anyone should follow, but I would say that always be prepared to have your assumptions challenged, right? Whenever you engage in dialogue or conversation, come with, I think, a knowledge that everyone involved has something to learn. We're all sharing expertise. We all maybe come with something that we can understand differently or better. And I suppose it's growth mindset at the start of and all throughout a research journey that I find really important.
Now, to respond to the point that has been made by Kate is, we have the tendency that when we are defining problems of maritime security, but there is a sort of a one-size-fits-all. So when the maritime security has been defined by a developed country or the international community, that's the same everywhere. It's not. It's not. There are things that are very specific to the region that needs to be understood. Just to give you one example. Why is it that the vessel monitoring system that has been established in this region, which is there for the last 20 years, is not operating? Why is it that the region, in fact, is not managing their maritime zones? So it can't be one study. We can learn from studies done elsewhere. But I think what is needed is the specificities of this region to be taken into account. So I think this is where there is a need to not be looking at the international literature, which exists, and then you can say, okay, this can apply. So we need here to understand what is happening exactly in this region. So I was saying that the first point to respond to the question by Brian is that there is a need to be specific, and there are lots to be learned. And for me, the international literature does not provide that specific elements to get things changed in this region. So we need to look at what is happening in the region. That's one. Secondly, for me, the value addition of having University of Oxford and Kate by our side is, in a way, and sorry, I'm being opportunist or maybe inward looking, is that I have like an independent external expert assessing me permanently, assessing our work permanently, and interacting with us, which is helping us to move in some direction. And that is very valuable, too valuable. And that's why I value very, very much this partnership. And I think that what's needed. Now, to go to a bit further down on these 2 points. One is you need to understand the specificity of the region. And secondly, you need to look at whatever you're doing, how far it is going in the right direction or in the opposite direction. And I think here, what has helped a lot is the trust and the confidence in the exchanges that we have had developed. Because it's not just doing like, you pay an expert and then he does a report and then, you disseminate the report. It's we have like a permanent exchange on every aspect of that report that we are looking at. And at the same time, it helps us to be looking, very, how can I say, very strategically. So for example, what we have produced, the policy brief, I can see, I came to understand that there is a need for such a tool to engage with international partners. Without that, you can't, because the international community, especially those international institutions which they think that they are too strong, I don't want to mention them, but they think that they're too strong, they think they know too much. In fact, what I understood is that they don't really bring much value to the regions. Most of the things that they do not end up making significant change in the way we are managing the maritime zones. In fact, if you listen to what the countries want, it will be the status quo with much ado about nothing. And so this is where this dialogue between the IOC and University of Oxford, but enabling IOC and me to look, helping me to look from a perspective, a faraway perspective, helps me to guide the actions in some way to the right direction. So all this becomes very modern. Now, the other thing is also that, and here I have to acknowledge that, when I go to see and meet a minister from this region, it's not the same thing when the University of Oxford comes and speaks to the minister. The clout that University of Oxford has, the document has been produced with a stamp, with a seal of University of Oxford. It gives a different clout. So the impact of what University of Oxford is saying together with us is we can't value that. It's very high. So now linked to that, you see maritime security challenges, whatever you can take it, very short, is under the responsibility of either the president or the prime minister, which means in the hierarchy of the government, it's at highest level. Who can go and tell them that, you're not doing well? So in this drive to get things changed, we really badly need institutions like University of Oxford to be by our side, to be speaking to those who have the authority to make changes. That's the real value addition, and it's I would say it's valueless. We can't estimate the value of that dialogue. So I think for me, that's what it is. Now, I've spoken at strategic level. Now, if you want me to go in specifics on the areas where we need research, there are lots, too much. So we have to prioritize, and that's how we prioritized to produce the policy brief as a tool to engage the countries and the stakeholders in the region and the international community. And then by participating, helping, and facilitating the participation of Kate in several fora, that helps to make our points stronger, to give strength to what we want to do. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that we would wish to find Kate and the University of Oxford by our side permanently. The more she participates in regional events, the more she participates in in producing some tools, the stronger our actions become.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you. Thank you, Kate. You have all been talking about a lot of things about complexities of with the region, both in terms of threats and actors. But we have been talking a lot about the partnership and the policy brief, which is a tool actually to communicate on something specific. And we haven't talked about that specific thing we are all working on, and which is the Regional Maritime Security Architecture. In a few words, Raj, tell us what it is in simple words, because we want our listeners to understand, because it's a complex architecture. Maritime security in itself is very complex, and in some words, in few words, please tell us what it is all about, what are the objectives, and Kate, based on what Raj would be saying, what do you think about the architecture? Because it's a state of art, a new thing, still being developed and learning from its own during the process. And from an outsider and a researcher, what is your view? What are your views about the architecture? Raj, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pascaline. First of all, I think what's very important for us to realize, and the message to be sent to all the countries, all the developing countries. As Kate said in the beginning, I am looking, the IOC is looking from a perspective of developing countries, not the developed countries, not the international community as it is. Most of the maritime security challenges, like drug trafficking, which is an international global problem. Drug is produced, for example, in Afghanistan. It is transformed as drugs in another country. It is then distributed through the maritime routes. So, just to take this example, we have to dismantle and disrupt this traffic. How do we do? If we take IU fishing, IU fishers fish in waters, but the countries are not able to look at that. So the maritime security architecture is to enable the countries to come together to address these challenges collectively. Why? Because the countries cannot deal with these challenges individually. So first, we have to get to the countries to acknowledge that. And I think they acknowledge now. This we have achieved. Secondly, now as the architecture, what we say is that given that the EZ of one country is linked and is the neighbor of the EZ of another country, if you look at the region's EZs, which means then that for a vessel to come and fish in one EZ, then run and go in another one. So let's look at the whole EZ. So the RMSA enables us to collectively look at the vessel, identify the vessels which are doing abnormal things. For example, if we have one country like Mauritius, it has a large EZ. There are how many fishing vessels in the EZ of Mauritius? Now, we should be able to see it because the technology now enables us to do that. So each of the countries should be able to know how many vessels or fishing vessels are there, how many have licenses, and how many do not have licenses. So what are they doing? Are they just passing by, or are they doing fishing? So we need to understand the behaviors of all the vessels. And then the architecture enables countries to collectively go and inspect that vessels. Now, in concrete terms, what does it mean? It means that you have a house and you have a garden. So you have to be able to do a surveillance of all the activities of foreigners in your house and in your garden. Because for the time being, drugs enter the countries through maritime routes and in their maritime zones. IU fishing is done in the maritime zones, but we don't know. So we have to know. So know all the illicit maritime activities in the whole region and facilitate inspection of those vessels. In a way, the objective is to see to it that the maritime zone, you don't have lawlessness. There is that anyone who is using the maritime zone is aware that beware, you're being watched. So if you're doing illicit activities, there will be consequences. So that's what it is about, in short.
Thank you, Raj. And Kate, are you ready?
Your mic is off.
The mic is off.
Sorry. One of the privileges of being able to watch the work around the architecture over, I guess I'm coming into my 9th year of observing its emergence, is, how much has been consolidated and achieved in that period. So it went from regional agreements of the member countries, being signed in 2018 to, today, where, both the centers in Madagascar and in Seychelles are operationally, very active. They're sharing maritime information. They're identifying threats, and they're conducting operations, on a regular basis. So, this has happened in a very short period of time. So I think, the rapid consolidation is something that is very noteworthy. The other point, which I already made, is that this is an architecture comprising states of the region. So it really is a regionally owned architecture. What counts as a threat, what threats take priority, how they should be apprehended, this is led by the countries of the region. So I think that's also very noteworthy. And we do have other, organizations and groups throughout the region that work on maritime security issues, but I would argue that this particular institution or set of interlocking institutions is the most regionally embedded and regionally led. And I think the other thing that, if I put my my outsider hat on, and I think from, Raj mentioned earlier, there's an international literature that sort of frames, not just maritime security problems, but regional institutions and types of cooperation in certain ways that, really base off of an outside experience. I've really enjoyed looking at what's different and unusual about the work that the RMSA, the architecture, does. So it's I think refreshing how, states with maybe not so many resources, think of patrol boats or planes, have brought those resources together to collectively, conduct operations. The way that they are working to share information, so that the regional picture, of course, is more powerful than any national picture. The way that they see opportunities in, of course, these are huge ocean spaces which are really hard to patrol. They're absolutely enormous, but the fact that they interconnect brings something to the table, because as Raj said, you can pursue a vessel that looks like it's conducting illicit activity from one maritime zone to the other, because you have the agreement of your neighboring states through the architecture. So there's also, I think, some really interesting ideas about, interconnecting maritime zones and that connectivity in a huge ocean space that actually brings these islands paradoxically very close together in how they want to work together and cooperate. So these are all really fascinating things that I think I've come to learn about and observe in the architecture.
Yes, thank you, Kate. Just coming back to Raj, you are all aware of what is happening actually in the region. It's quite worrying with the increase in piracy over the past year, with merchant vessels hijacked and dozens of seafarers held hostage. And is the IOC, or the Regional Maritime Security Architecture, involved in supporting efforts in terms of sharing of information or even joint operations? Tell us more about that, please.
Yeah, of course, definitely this is something too important. Now, again, I think there are many actors at international level who are looking at all this. And I think what's key is that the RMSA should not be duplicating on what others which have better means to look at, understand, and deal with. So we have to see to it that we are complementary to the efforts of the others in what is happening in the Middle East. So first, the second point is that what I have, maybe I'm wrong, but the countries in this region do not have a good understanding of what's happening. They rely very much on the international media and channels to understand. There is no platform for experts from the region to analyze what is happening and then exchange to the region and dialogue with the region what it means. What I'm trying to say is that while we do understand the limitations of the capacity of this region, we should also acknowledge that the region cannot be ignored in the international fora as to what are the implications to the region and what the region can do either to develop resilience or to contribute to the solutions. So that's the bigger picture. Now, in terms of the concrete activities, first, we do have the RMFC and some experts there who sit and analyzes from our perspectives, and we exchange on this. So we are trying to, that analysis we are doing. So for example, our assessment is that what is happening in the Middle East, we already had, I can forecasted that there will be an increase of piracy because the whole international community, all the forces that are there are not looking at Somalia, but are looking at the Middle East, which means there is a void that has been created, and that's where there have been some increase of piracy, right? That's one. Secondly, we believe that there will be lots of, illegal traffic going on. Illegal drug trafficking will increase, arms trafficking will increase, and you know that lots of light arms enter Africa and the islands every year. So that will be there. And other illicit maritime activities will increase. So that is the impact. Now, we believe also that it is important for us to, get the countries to come together and then sit and then explore options of what kind of resilience we can create. Of course, the issue of whether petrol prices are increasing, that we have to develop resilience against the fuel energy supplies, extra. That's also there. But at the same time, we should be able to talk among ourselves, not just amongst those who are already talking at the fora. So that's where, given that we, IOC, is also has this responsibility of the Secretariat of the Contact Group Against Piracy of the coast of Somalia, formerly, but now the Contact Group Against Illicit Maritime Activities. We have already organized in April a first meeting of this platform, because this is the only international platform which was created by the UN Security Council, which exists in the region. And we are organizing on the 24th of July a plenary session to look at all these things and understand and bring also the international community together to look at what is that we can do together. Because I believe very strongly that there are lots happening, but the region and the countries of the region are not fully informed about what the policies of X, Y, and Z, whoever is acting in the Middle East. So we are like in kept in dark. But this is where we believe that it's our role and responsibility to bring experts and to bring the international community in a platform and discuss and talk about it, and then maybe take some measures. Thank you.
Thank you. I will have another question. You mentioned something interesting, saying that there are little or no analysis coming from the region when it comes to maritime security. But the past years, we've seen that there's also an increasing number of experts, African experts in maritime security coming forward now more in, I would say in conferences and all. What do you think you should do, or the RMSA or the IOC or the partnership research practice that you have with the University of Oxford and probably other universities? What can be done to bring these experts together and ensure that there's a sort of first conversation, dialogue, and bring them together, having like that regional analysis in between different sectors, of course, not because maritime security is vast. We're also talking about ocean economy, governance, etc., etc. What do you think can be done in the future to bring these experts together and produce a regional analysis coming from these people from different countries in the region, Western Indian Ocean or even Eastern or Western Africa? We can see things very broadly. Tell us, what do you think can be done?
Now, first of all, I'd like to be a bit more precise on what I was trying to say. There are analyses done in the region, by the region. The point I was trying to make is that there are several, I would say, institutions, think tanks or universities in the region. Not too many, but there are a few, and they do this analysis. But the point I was trying to make, and this is very important, I think it's very important to be clear, is that the states in the region are not developing their national responses and policies or collective regional responses and policies based on I would say a very good expert analysis of what's happening in the Middle East. The few institutions that are doing some analysis, they are doing it individually. It is kept there on their own. Either they are writing some articles, but it's not done in a formal manner so that it impacts or any influences policy making at national and regional level. That was the point I'm trying to make. Now, for the main gist of your question, this is exactly, you're right, absolutely. Because of the existing think tanks and regional actors and universities, there are few, not many, compared to the issues that need to be addressed and understood and analyzed. We will initiate the establishment of a network of institutions and research institutions to be working collectively to ensure that regularly there are very serious papers produced, and that these papers are produced to counter the gap in the capacity of analysis of the individual member states, and hence to be put forefront. And then we should sensitize on these papers and get on, like University of Oxford, University of Copenhagen, the other key international expertise and actors to come and confront those papers with them. So this is on the agenda, not from the perspective of doing the analysis only. understanding what are the issues, but more importantly also to influence decision-making and policy development, both at national and regional level, but also developing resilience of the countries and of the region to maritime security challenges.
Thank you, Raj. And Kate, would you like to add something or?
No, I think it would be a great idea. I'm in full support. I think that having differently situated researchers produces a similar effect to having, we talked earlier about how when you bring researchers and policymakers and people in the operational space together, the culmination of those different vantage points, produces a different kind of knowledge. And I think that that's the case with research communities as well. Researchers in international institutions, in places like Western Europe and the United States have a lot to learn, as I hope I've already underscored, from regional perspectives. And hopefully there are synergies there, conversations that can be had that enrich, researchers in both places. So more interaction, more conversations. And I think, it's really important, the point you made, Pascaline, that there are, many researchers now, particularly working on West African maritime security, but also maritime security in the region that we've been discussing today. And their voices need to be foregrounded more, and their findings and their long research should be, built upon and engaged with by scholars and practitioners alike in other locations. So, I think leveling of the playing field in many senses is really valuable.
Thank you. Brian, you wanted to take over?
Yes. No, it's not take over, but just to ask, there is a point that Raj made about international media, which is true. And I think last week there was an attack, on an attempted attack on a vessel, and it's the Indian Navy which was able to respond, because they also have the Indian Maritime Information Fusion Center. And even I also work for an international media, and most of the alerts we get is mainly from EU NAVFOR or the UK Maritime Trade Organization Center, UKMTO, which is also interesting because I wanted to understand, do you also send as RMSA, are you able to have these live, where you're able to flag off vessels which are suspicious in real time? And what is the niche that you'd like RMSA to take? I know you said about complementing these other organizations and, all these bodies which collect intelligence or maritime intelligence within the region. How do you see the relationship between RMSA and those other bodies which are able to reach the international media? Because we also need maybe a lot of feeds from RMSA to media, because these things are happening within our waters. Mm-hmm. And most critically, Somalia is within this particular region. Mm-hmm. And now there are more than, I think, 3 vessels which are detained within Somalia with 44 seafarers. Are there attempts, just besides flagging of vessels, are there attempts maybe even to work with Somali's government to try and get these seafarers released or these vessels released? I would love to hear your comment on that.
So first, as I said earlier, we do not claim to compete with very, I would say, strong international institutions like UKMTO or like Singapore, IFC, or the India, etc. What we think important for us is, of course, we do get information, but the capacity that we have can't be compared to those. So believe that the information that we are getting, that the information that UNAFO has, CMF has, UCANTO has, and there are several of these, we should not add to being competing with them. So what we need to do is, on top of that, whatever information we can get by ourselves, we'll take the information that others provide, and we look at, from the perspective of the region, what does it mean to the region? Because what those others do, they look at those information and what is the interest from, for example, the maritime industry. So let's not compete. Let's see how we can complement. So what we believe, and this is one of the actions that we have planned to do, is to have a sort of a working relationship among all the IFCs. Because you have to understand that the RMSA is, on one hand, an IFC, the Regional Maritime Information Fusion Center, which is equivalent to IFC Iowa or IFC Singapore, but less endowed in terms of capacity, whether it's through human resource capacity, or whether it is MDA tools, or whether it is IT, new technologies, etc. And the RMSA, and this is where its uniqueness is, it has a mandate to pool assets from countries to go and inspect particular vessels. This is unique in the world. Now, so on the part of information exchange, we focus more on the analysis of its impact to the region. But then what we believe we'll do in the future, because we're working on that, to bring in the other IFCs and establish a working relationship on how we can complement each other, share the analysis of each other, and improve the quality of our analysis of the region and of others as well. And in the report that others will do, that they will bring in the region's perspective there, which then can be fed to the international community. For example, you are in the media, have you found in the international media what is happening to the region because of the Middle East crisis and the maritime security challenges and the impact, whether it has increased or decreased? No. From the region itself, we know. From industry's perspective, yes. From some countries, yes. So it is skewed towards some key stakeholders, not the rest of the Western Indian Ocean region. So this is where we bring in. So that's your first part of the question. The second part of the question about Somalia. We have always tried to get Somalia to be part of the RMSA. If you look at the overall RMSA, you have Djibouti, which is in the north of Somalia, and then you have Seychelles, which is in the east. You have then Madagascar, Comoros, and Kenya in the south, which means that if the whole region is being covered, then we can also address the challenges of Somalia. Not later than, I think last week, I had a call from Somalia, and we've been calling upon them to come and join us so that we can help in addressing. In the past, I can tell you, the recent past, this year, we don't have I am trying not to get in the technicalities, but you have to have systems to know which vessels, fishing vessels, for example, have licenses to fish. So there was some 30, last year, the RMFC identified some 30 vessels fishing illegally in Somali waters. We did it illegally, we shared with the Somalians, and they IU vessels were arrested. So to tell you, yes, we are ready. We can contribute, not in the same manner and not on the same extent to what other countries will do. But again, let's come back to my earlier point, is that with what is happening in the Middle East, the whole attention and the resources are diverted to the Middle East, up north. So the Somalian waters are left. That's why there have been now a few Somalian piracy attacks, and 3 vessels now are captured, and there are these hostages, and those hostages are having a very tough time there. So that's exactly what I was trying to say, is that because of the Middle East, the most important, I would say, indicator that the region is being marginalized is this, what's happening. But then what we can say is that this is impacting also the international community, because those who are hijacked the vessels, they are part of the international community, part of the maritime industry.
Pascaline, you can.
Yes, thank you. Raj, I would like to, I have a question with regards, you mentioned the media. It's very important when it comes to communicating to a larger public, and you know, as you already know, maritime security is a very complex. And how do you engage with the media to ensure that they have the right information? As you already know, you don't have much specialized media, maritime security media, globally, but in the region, we can count on our fingers the number of media that are specialized in maritime security. And I'm still based on the work you're doing with University of Oxford, but and probably with other institutions. How do you engage with the media and ensure that they have the right information, that they become knowledgeable, so that they can make that analysis and create awareness to the greater public, to the bigger public? So, that's a question that came out based on what you were saying, and I think it's important to raise that question, because we are doing, the authorities are doing a lot of things, great things, to improve the governance, the maritime governance, but still the public outside that architecture, outside that sector, do not actually know what is happening, and it's a shame, because at some point you have to. As government has to inform at national level. You talk about ownership. I think this can be a tool to raise awareness and also create that ownership at national level, but also at regional level. So, based on these, what do you think should be done? How do you engage with the media? Are you already engaged with the media? Probably, but what could be done further to improve that?
Well, you're absolutely right that this is an area where we are not doing too well. We have to acknowledge that. We should have a strategy for engaging with the media, a permanent process, not a one-off. For the time being, what we do is that when there is an event, for example, we are organizing the CEGIMA plenary, we will communicate with the media. But then, no, that should not be the case. We should have a process for engaging with the media on a permanent basis, which we're not doing. So yes, indeed, this is an area where we need to do a lot. But at the same time, I would say also that the media in this region are not that much, until there is something that happens to the country, the media doesn't get that interest. It's very much focused on, how can I say, the specific interest of the media in that country, of the target audience. So if you're talking about something, hostage in Somalia, they may not just can write one line or even don't mention it at all. So that's the thing. The issue is in the media. The media also thinks national. The media is not geared towards thinking about the regional goods, the common challenges. And I believe you're right. I believe that there is need to be some work that needs to be done. We are thinking about that. And I think that we have to have a strategy that needs to be established. And this is most probably something that will need to also work, not just specifically for SEJIMA, separately for RMSA, but we need to have a sort of a coordinated platform for addressing collectively for SEJIMA, for RMSA, for DCOC to be working together. So yes, this is also an area where lots needs to be done right now.
And maybe a question to Kate, just to borrow her knowledge about international maritime security from different theaters. Right now, we've been having an issue in the last 3 years or so, the issue in Southern Red Sea with Houthis. Now there is a problem in the Persian Gulf, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, the resurgence of the Somali Piracy. All these are key, distinct, but also very disruptive events within the Western Indian Ocean. I know you've been following the events very closely. Should we see them as one problem, or that's requiring a similar approach, or how do we frame the solution to all these, to the three disruptive those three disruptive events? What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, of course, it's hard to miss what's happening. And, I think Raj's points are really powerful, that there does seem to be a changing regional security environment, right? Because with the Houthi attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea, this has shifted naval priorities. A number of multinational maritime forces have diverted their assets. I think, it's fair to say, really up into different spheres. So, we've seen assets diverted towards missile defense, convoy protection, safeguarding traffic through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, in reference to the Red Sea here. This, of course, I think allows what was, a situation of piracy that, to repeat the phrase which has been used again in the region, it was not eradicated, it was suppressed. I think EU NAVFOR have the Atlanta mission has been very clear that if you keep up a naval presence, if you share intelligence, if you coordinate with commercial shipping, you can keep piracy at quite low levels. But you need sustained attention. And if you don't have that, then the naval resources become overstretched, and the kind of deterrence effect that flows from those patterns of patrolling and so on disappear. So, of course, the disruption the closure of the Strait of Hormuz complicates all of this even further. Further reduces the naval presence available for counter-piracy operations. And, I think one of the risks on the horizon is that the Indian Navy, which has, played a really important role in suppressing Somali piracy, during 2023, 2024, and more recently, they're a force whose priorities, may need to shift again to the Strait of Hormuz, because the closure has been such a problem for the Indian economy. So this is all interconnected. I think coming back to the region, though, because this is where I'm really interested in what does this mean for the countries that are operating through the architecture. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Raj, but it seemed what you were saying earlier is that when we first had the response to the piracy, from 2008 onwards, many international tools were built and deployed. And if I understand your comments correctly, you were saying, well, actually, the IOC took the lead on trying to address maritime security issues precisely because there were issues that were not addressed by those existing, operations initiatives, right? So it's not just that they were overlooking maritime security issues that were affecting IOC countries and littoral East African countries. It was also that I think, you know, the deployment of vessels, I guess the kind of the deterrence effect that suppressed piracy also meant that different types of maritime crime flourished and perhaps moved southward and affected regional countries in the Western Indian Ocean in new and unprecedented ways. So we're on the theme still of interconnectivity, but we're seeing now the negative externalities of when a certain set of actors think about their own interests, devise solutions, deploy those solutions, and then there are negative repercussions elsewhere. So all of this interconnectedness, the fact that the IOC had to step in and create these institutions and now have a very, you know, clear conversation about regional maritime security, the fact that whatever the international community writ large does, again, to address the piracy problem, it will impact everything around it because of the interconnectedness of things. It just seems to me so obvious that you cannot have a solution to any of these crises without drawing in, you know, the countries of the Regional Maritime Security Architecture. It'd be crazy not to really build them into diagnosing the problems, thinking about solutions that are both practicable and legitimate, and working together to actually enact those solutions. So, you know, that's my sort of response to this idea of the theme of interconnectedness.
Yeah, but you're absolutely right. You know, if you look at the CGSPS and the international community was focused on piracy. Now, you remember the Somalis were hammering every now and then that we have IU fishing, we have we can't even control, and I think that's my opinion that and 3 years ago that's why the Somalians said, hey, no more now, you're free ride, you can just come in the, so out. So that's how you're not addressing there is no piracy. Okay, you're controlling the piracy, fine, and now go away. So that's how the UN Security Council, they vetoed any future, I think that was in 2023. So what I'm trying to say is that it shows that, you see, the specific challenges of maritime security are not being addressed by the international community. They are focusing on one, and I participated at one recent event together with the big players, and it was clear let's go and focus only on piracy, not on other things. So the region will remain on its own to deal with other challenges. Now, since 15 years, my estimate is that the traffic of drug became more organized at regional level through the maritime route. Wakasho happened after, 10 years after, 11 years after, or at least 7-8 years after piracy was controlled. So, what I'm trying to say, you support your view is that all the tools and the mechanisms that were put in place help to control under control piracy, not the other maritime security challenges. On the contrary, the other maritime security challenges were left on their own.
Thank you very much, Kate and Raj. Now we will have to wrap up. It's been more than 1 hour. Last question. Do you have a last question, Brian? And maybe then I'll ask my last question, and then we close the session.
Yeah, I have a last question, maybe which Kate and Raj could make clear. From what I was hearing is the Navy's shifted focus and went, upwards, but on a long-term basis, because you cannot still keep on saying the Navy's shifted focus. And I mean, the solution cannot just be from a naval perspective. There must be other solutions. So what do you see could be?
But that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
What is the RMSA is supposed to be permanent and in the region to address all the maritime security crimes. While when there was piracy, the international community came and dealt with piracy, and then they got disinterested. So much so that the trust fund that was established on piracy was even dismantled because there were no interest. Now, afterwards, what came is the issue of Middle East. And now again, they're going and the attention is there. So what is happening to the region is not the interest of the international community. So something else will happen tomorrow. So that's where the RMSA becomes important as a permanent mechanism in the region, by the region, to deal with the maritime security challenges in the region.
Oh, okay.
Can I add on to that? And that is, there's a conversation happening now among some scholars of international relations in light of we're seeing global governance more generally being it's in decline, right? There's sort of both in terms of ideology, a belief in whether working multilaterally together to solve global problems is even worth it. We have really powerful countries turning inward, particularly, the United States under the the two Trump administrations. It's really pulled the United States away from key international organizations, institutions, mechanisms. And so the conversation now is, what comes in to replace that? And one of the really interesting trends, I think, is what people are calling the regionalization of global governance, right? Where regions start to understand that they need to pick up, the reins. They need to really, drive forward their own solutions to international problems. And what I find in that conversation, which is, it's both a conversation in this historical moment, it's also a conversation that is of academic value, a conversation that helps us predict and put forward policy solutions, is that you actually have right here in the Western Indian Ocean an example of that process already having taken place, right? We've seen a global crisis, we've seen big powers lose interest in it and withdraw, and we've seen the legacies of that, which is the setting up of these institutions, their operationalization, and their quest for permanence, right, as an anchor for policy solutions in the region. So I actually think that we could be using this architecture as a case study for thinking through this broader trend. And the conversation goes well beyond, the regional setting that we focused on today.
Thank you very much. My question would be, what gives each of you confidence about the future of maritime security cooperation? I think Kate has already given a bit of the answer, probably Raj, and also what's next about the partnership, IOC, University of Oxford. What are your next plan? What are you planning? Thank you.
Well, we are planning on how best to use the policy brief now. So we are working on that one, how to then mobilize, use it, develop a tool, use it. So that's what we've already agreed between me and Kate. So that will be the next concrete step. Now, regarding the future plans, of course, we have to be optimistic, because if not, it's no point in initiating something when you're pessimistic. But we do understand the evolution of the global ecosystem, and this is where, and Kate is absolutely right, but we have to rely among ourselves in the region. So in terms of future, what we can only expect, for me, I always like the what Gandhi has given as a response when he was called upon by journalists when he went for the walk to produce salt. And the journalist asked him a question, that you're 600 miles away from the sea. Do you think that you'll get all the support you need and you'll be able to go and produce salt so that the monopoly of salt will be, and it will be more accessible to the population? And he was saying, I am clear exactly about my objective. I know exactly what I need to do. And every single step is bringing me closer to my objective. That's exactly what RMSA is about.
Last word, Kate, before we end.
That was such a poetic last word. I feel bad to add anything else. I don't want to ruin the atmosphere. I think that if I go back to, that earlier point where I admitted, I was very ignorant and I'd never heard of the Indian Ocean Commission as an English speaker, right? And I think one of the things that is changing that is really exciting is that the Indian Ocean Commission is being known more and more in the English-speaking world. I think there's plenty of information about the Indian Ocean Commission in French, but maybe less in English. And I think really, when we look at the policy brief, what it was trying to do, it was trying to tell the story of the architecture on its own terms. And I'm really glad that story is getting out. As Raj says, we're working to disseminate it further. And I'm hoping that it will spur more and more research on the achievements, but also the challenges ahead. This is a sort of institutions that need constant political prioritization and commitment. They also need resourcing. I think, the message that I would like to finish with is that these are very valuable institutions. They are the product of a regional set of conversations that have been going on for at least sort of 2010, and engage, and that there's a lot to learn, and I think a lot more progress to be made.
Thank you very much, Kate, and thank you very much, Raj. It was very interesting. We will publish this podcast on the website of Blue Radio, and we'll share with you the link. And Brian will also write an article on the on our podcast. Key recommendations on what we have been discussed. We'll also share that with you. And thank you for taking the time to speak to us and for us to understand better what you have been doing and where you are going. And it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Meeting. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.